Hi everyone, we are now going to take a look at problem 4-15 on page 176 as our practice. So hopefully you tried this one on your own, and now we'll take a look at the answer. Marine Inc. manufactures a product that is available in both a flexible and a rigid model. The company has made the rigid model for years. The flexible model was introduced several years ago to tap a new segment of the market. Since introduction of the flexible model, the company's profits have steadily declined, and management has become concerned about the accuracy of its costing system. Sales of the flexible model have been increasing rapidly. Overhead is applied to products on the basis of direct labor hours. At the beginning of the current year, management estimated that $600,000 in overhead costs would be incurred, and the company would produce and sell 1,000 units of the flexible model and 10,000 units of the regular model. The flexible model requires 2 hours of direct labor time per unit, and the regular model requires 1 hour. Direct materials and labor costs per unit are given below. So you can see the direct materials per flexible is $110, per rigid, $80. The direct labor cost for flexible is $30, rigid is $15. The first requirement is to compute the predetermined overhead rate using direct labor hours as the basis for allocated overhead costs to products. Compute the unit product cost for 1 unit of each model. Now, let's go back up. So to compute that, we're first going to look at how many hours we're going to be using for flexible model. So 1,000 units, 2 hours of direct labor time, so 2,000 hours. The rigid model will be producing 10,000 units, 1 hour direct labor hour per unit, 10,000 hours. So the overall total direct labor hours are 12,000. If we're going to allocate manufacturing overhead on the basis of total direct labor hours, we want to take the total manufacturing overhead of 600,000 divided by the 12,000 direct labor hours that will be used, $50 per direct labor hour. So what's the total cost for the flexible? Well, the direct materials are $110, direct labor are $30, and since we use 2 hours of direct labor hours to apply manufacturing overhead, 2 hours times $50 per hour, manufacturing overhead is $100. So the total product cost per flexible unit is $240. We'll do the same computation for the rigid. 80 for direct labor hours given, or direct materials, $15 for direct labor. And then since it takes 1 direct labor hour is associated with manufacturing overhead, times $50 per direct labor hour, total manufacturing overhead applied for the rigid product is $50 per product. So the total cost of that is $145. Now, in the second requirement, an intern suggested that the company use activity-based costing to cost its products. A team was formed to investigate this idea. It came back with the recommendation that 4 activity cost pools be used. These cost pools and their associated activities are as follows. So it costs $20,000 in total for the orders, the purchase orders. The expected activity related to that is 100 flexible, 300 rigid. Rework requests. The number of requests in total should be 10,000. The $10,000. The number of requests, 60 for flexible, 140 for rigid. Product testing. The total cost is $210,000. The total activity related to that total cost is 90 flexible, 1,200 rigid, or a total of 2,100. And then machine-related total cost is 360,000. Total machine hours, 1,500 related to the flexible, 2,500 related to the rigid. So compute the activity rate for each of the activity cost pools. Well, to do that, we'll take the total cost in each category divided by the total activity. So there is $20,000 costs. The total number of orders are 400. So $50 per order. The rework request total cost is 10,000. Expected 200 requests, or $50 per request. So now we're costing it based on pools of activity and the related number of activities. The total product testing costs $210,000. How many tests are expected to be performed? 2,100, $100 per test. $360,000 cost related to the machine hours. How many hours are expected for it to be used? 4,000 machine hours. So $90 per machine hour. So that's how we determine the activity rate for each cost pool. Now, using activity-based costing, do the following. Determine the total amount of overhead that would be assigned to each model for the year. So now we're going to say, okay, how much manufacturing overhead is there related to the purchase order for each one? Well, if there's 100 flexible, 100 purchase orders related to the flexible, that's $5,000. If there's 60 rework requests, 60 times $50 per request, $3,000 is the total cost assigned to that activity pool. If there's going to be 900 tests related to product testing, and you charge $100 per test, $90,000 is associated with that for the flexible. And if there's 1,500 machine hours being used for the flexible at $90 per hour, the total cost is $135,000. So of the total manufacturing overhead, $233,000 is assigned to the flexible based on activity. We'll do the same for rigid. The activity, the number of orders for the rigid model is 300 times $50, so $15,000. The number of rework requests for the rigid will be 140 times $50, $7,000. The total number of tests for the rigid are 1,200 times the $100 per test, so $120,000 is assigned to the rigid due to that activity. And then 2,500 of machine hours are expected for the rigid at $90 an hour, so that's $225,000 for that activity. So now, instead of just assigning a manufacturing overhead in total, we're assigning it based on activity and the expected activity for each item. So now the total amount of manufacturing overhead due to activity is 360,000. The number of units that are expected to be produced are 10,000. So overhead cost per unit for flexible is 233. For rigid, it's 3670. So now using activity-based costing, let's say how much the flexible costs and the rigid. Direct materials are still $110 per unit for the flexible, $30 for direct labor. But now look at the manufacturing overhead, $233 or $373 total product cost, where under the job costing, it was only coming out as $240. Quite a difference. The rigid, $80 for the direct materials, $15 for the direct labor, and $36.70 per unit for manufacturing overhead, or a total unit product cost of $131.70, which is only slightly lower than under the product cost using direct labor hours to determine manufacturing overhead. So with activity-based costing, you're looking more at the activities and determining manufacturing overhead based on activities, major activities. Here they came up with 4 major activities that contributed to manufacturing overhead, and then determined a rate per activity, and then assigned the total cost based on the expected level of activity in each pool to each item. Can you identify a possible explanation for the company's declining profits? Well, after seeing this, absolutely. The product costs are distorted when you use direct labor hours as the base for applying overhead product costs. So you're not charging as much as you should because you're believing right now the total cost of the product is $240, when in fact it's $373. Although the flexible model requires twice as much labor as the rigid model, it still is not being assigned enough overhead costs. According to the activity-based costing system, the flexible model is more expensive to manufacture than the company thought. Note, the flexible model accounts for 37.5% of the machine hours worked, although it represents a small part of the company's total output. Also, it consumes a disproportionately large amount of the other activities because we're producing 1,000 compared to the 10,000. So when activity-based costing is used in place of maybe direct labor hours as the basis for assigning overhead costs, the unit product cost jumps from 240 to 373. So if you're using that 240 to determine the selling price, you're probably using too low of a selling price. And that may be the reasons why, although you're selling a lot, profits are declining. So you can see this example and how activity-based costing helps you predict a more accurate product cost than assigning overhead costs based on direct labor hours or machine hours. So that is how we use activity-based costing. So please post any kind of questions that you may have to the discussion board.